Welcome, everybody. It was funny because I was going to say, welcome to Scientology's Aftermath, but that didn't seem quite right. You don't say it like that with a smile on your face. But I wanted to welcome you to the panel called Scientology's Aftermath for second-generation members, which is something that is a particular issue, kind of a particular umbrella under ICSA, where they're really focusing in on the next generations. And by second generation, we also mean third generation, fourth generation, just the people who were raised in something that was not of their choosing. And so I am hoping that you're going to be able to ask the questions that you want to be able to ask. It's going to be my job to call on you, so I apologize ahead of time if I don't get to you. But I think we're going to be able to answer all of your questions, hopefully, today. And if more come up, you can certainly let us know, in the hallways or afterwards, to be in touch. What I want to do first is introduce myself, Rachel Bernstein. I'm a therapist. I've been working with former cult members and their families for 27 years. I've been doing it in Los Angeles, then in New York, and now back in Los Angeles. And so you can, of course, be in contact with me. And today, during the panel, when there are questions for the panelists, and then it kind of goes into the treatment questions, they're welcome to answer it or toss it back to me, and we can kind of coordinate how to answer those questions and try to hit all the points that you're asking about. So I want to be able to introduce our wonderful panelists today, and you're going to love hearing from them. And the way we're doing it also is they're just going to speak very briefly and really devote most of their time to answering your specific questions, which is a really nice way to do it. So it's going to be very interactive. So first, Christy Gordon. She is a second-generation survivor of Scientology who dealt with a world of neglect and abuse and deception and exploitation from age 2 to 21. As a victim and witness to so much abuse, she truly wants to devote her energies now to speaking out, to being able to do education and prevention, and also to be able to prevent future harm to children. And it's wonderful to have her here. I think being able to use your experience in that way is a beautiful thing. So welcome, Christy. Let me go on to introducing Aaron Smith-Levin. He was raised in Scientology and worked for the organization full-time as a staff member and in the Sea Org from ages 12 to 26. He left the Sea organization in 2006 and officially left Scientology in 2014. He is now the vice president of the Aftermath Foundation. If you haven't heard of it, definitely check it out. It's a nonprofit created by contributors to the Leah Remini show. And it's really to help people leaving Scientology to really get back onto their feet, which is a very important thing. Part of the questions I hope that you ask today, too, are those practical questions. How do you get back on your feet? There are the psychological questions, and then there are the how-to questions that are really very important and very practical. And he now lives in Clearwater, Florida, which I've heard of. It might be a familiar city to some of you. With his wife and 3 daughters. Okay, and now Chris Shelton at the end. He works to educate the public about extremist, high-control groups through his videos, through his podcasts, and also through his book. And he left Scientology in 2012 after nearly 25 years of membership. I know I'm throwing out a lot of numbers, but these are really incredible numbers. Just the ages, starting at such a young age, and how many years you're involved in a group, because every day that you're involved in a cult makes an impact. So think about it like that. Chris was a second-generation Scientologist and brought up into the group at age 3 by his parents in California and began working for Scientology after completing high school. And he promotes critical thinking, sort of evaluating the information, how to evaluate information, how to evaluate it for yourself. And it's a way to counter that kind of undue influence and thought reform techniques. And one of your future goals, you were saying, is to be able to go on for more studies, to really study undue influence, but also to study the idea of extremism and anti-extremism, which is very important in our world today. So let's start with Christy, and then we'll move down the row, and then we'll open it up for question and answer.
I'm not sure if you can hear me. Can anyone not hear me? My voice is soft. Can you hear me in the back? Okay, awesome. I just want to read something. I'm not a public speaker, so hopefully you'll humor me. First, I want to say how thankful I am to be here, and I'm really glad that you're here. Thanks for coming. I'm just honored to have the opportunity to create some awareness around the plight of kids raised in places like Scientology, and to stand up and be counted finally and find my voice. I wish that I hadn't been compromised as a child. I wish that my mother and my family hadn't been lured into mind control when we were young, and then all of us were robbed of 20 years of our lives instead of actual happiness or real freedom, sanity, health, our educations, marriages, childhood, and including humanity, love, compassion, empathy, and even each other are the things that we were robbed of. We were indoctrinated, turned against one another, isolated, abused, exploited, and enslaved, basically. After we all got out, thankfully, it took me decades to be willing to look back at it all and to start dissecting and exploring it, trying to understand it, and finally try to come to terms with it. And it's a really strange thing to not know who you are, where it ends and you begin. It's kind of like having split personalities, I would say, and wearing masks, a lot of masks. Which reality is the real one? Who am I really? Am I the enemy that they called me when I left, or am I really the victim? That was hard for me to figure out. And it's been really rocky, and I'm definitely a work in progress, but it's getting better, and I'm becoming more aware, and I just wish that I'd gotten to this point sooner. My hope is that all of us that can, and some can't, do circle back and stand up, and that helps to put a stop to the abuses that we experienced, and the rights that we unknowingly sacrificed, the time that we lost that we won't get back, and the friends and family that we might never see again. And I've pretty much shared my personal experience in various different ways, and really what I'm trying to do now is focus more attention on the overall experience of children that were raised in a thing like Scientology, what that feels like to a child, to a developing mind. What are the effects on us short and long term? How do we heal from that? What can be done to stop it from happening again? And that's really my interest now. I want to better understand it myself, help expose it, help other people understand it, and then do whatever we can do to put an end to it. Recently, kids like me have been gathering, uniting, and our numbers are really growing. We have a really unique community that's amazing and heartbreaking also, but we're really just beginning to pick up pace, and we're putting aside our fear and the shame that we've carried and the guilt that was instilled, and we're starting to step out of the shadows, reconnecting, supporting one another, and beginning to heal. Putting words to what happened to us, which is a really hard thing if you don't know those words. We didn't grow up with emotions, so we have to figure out what those are and understand them. And then admit what became of us as a result of that childhood. And I think what we found is that our courage is contagious, A lot of us are ready to talk about it, we're ready to do something about it, and it's been a really long time coming. The one thing I've learned that I know for sure is that isolation has been our greatest enemy. Knowing that now, we intend to eliminate that through community. It's kind of like we were raised by wolves, and then we turned into lone wolves, and now uniting, we're a bit of a wolf pack. And we found strength in numbers. I hope that you'll join us in our evolution and this revolution to find and use our voices to take back our power, to help empower all the children of Scientology, and all the children of abusers like Scientology. We have a website coming out, childrenofscientology.com. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening.
Can you tell us the website again?
childrenofscientology.com.
Is it live?
Not yet. It's still in dev, and we've got some amazing, amazing content that's, I think, going to be life-changing. So I hope you guys tune in. It's probably a couple months off still. And it's meant to be inclusive. It's not, it doesn't matter whether you're in or out.
So one of the things just that is so great about this project that Christy's spearheading is that up until now, really when a lot of these second-gen guys tell their story ends up being told through someone else's lens. Someone else decides what the most important and sexy parts of their story are that get told. And it's not a positive experience for a lot of people who've gone through that. And so this is going to be a platform where they're just on their own, at their own speed, decide what they're going to tell. And they're just going to put it out there. It's just going to be a platform. It's like almost a self-publishing kind of, right? It's like it's going to be a sort of a blog, website format where they'll tell their own story. They don't submit it to someone else who makes editorial decisions about what's going to be included, what's not going to be included. And it's a big difference compared to what's been happening.
Exactly. They get to share as much or as little as they want, and we get to be the experts on our experience and no one else. So we'll blaze that trail, and I think that's pretty empowering. We will have an editor section so that there's a lot of us that really struggle. I don't know how many here are second gens. Can I get a hand? 1, 2. We're few and far between. Some people have a hard time putting their story to words, even dissociative periods that are blurry and you can't even remember how things went. You moved so much or you had so much trauma. So we do have people that will help with that. And that's been incredibly amazing so far, giving these kids voices that can't find it within and letting them find their own voice, really. So it's going to be healing for all of us to participate in it, to allow people to participate in it, to use it as an educational awareness piece for the outside, I think is going to be pretty amazing. So stay tuned.
We knew a young woman who was in Teen Mania, and she started a website, and people came out of the woodworks. I mean, she was up to, I don't know, thousands,
Wow.
Maybe 10,000 people that had been in Teen Mania and found her. And they started talking about their experience, and they had no idea that the other ones also felt the same. So it was so neat to see that.
That's exactly what we've experienced. As we've created groups and things where we've collected, it's incredible the patterns of abuse and trauma and effects that we've all shared. And once we open up about them, it's so healing to not feel isolated and, as if you were the only one that had this problem or ashamed of this problem.
Just a quick word about the editing, and we went back and as great as the A&E stuff is, we rewatched a show that we had watched, not a Scientology show, the Retried show, and I found myself saying, why this music here? Why 20 minutes of commercials there and telling this story? So when you say about editing it yourself, it's going to be a very different story, because actually we had heard Ashley's story here on Wednesday, and we had seen it, but I went back, and it was a totally different experience watching it on TV, because they edited it. It was very conscious that they had edited it. They had decided what parts of the story would sell, and I understand that. But what you're doing is going to be a different experience. I think that's great.
I agree. We have a lot of freedom we'll have.
Yeah. There are a couple questions in the back. Did you want to take them now?
Oh, of course.
Okay, so yes.
I think one of you said that this website would be open. It doesn't matter whether you're in Scientology or out. How do you expect, how do you anticipate people who are still in Scientology to participate? And will they be able to tell their stories still being in it?
No. I don't think you meant people that are in Scientology would be telling their stories, right?
Odds are they wouldn't come to our site.
Right.
They might stumble across it. Odds are they wouldn't. They're not allowed to look at things that are en theta, bad, critical. Sorry. So they can't. They self-police. So odds are, but what we hope to reach are some people that are under the radar, that are curious and looking, and they might stumble across us or hear about us and read something and maybe want to weigh in. And there'll be private polls so they can, answer questions, share stories, have private dialogue with us. There'll be a forum for that. But odds are people that are actively in won't come there. I wish they would.
Right, exactly.
We'd love them to.
Are
Okay.
you going to have some kind of system where you vet them and, say very close, but you get to invite people? Or?
It's not private.
It's going to be a public website.
It's totally public, and we're willing to have dialogue with people that disagree with us. It's fine. The forum will be where that'll happen, and we have multiple mods, and we're all second gens, and really compassionate, empathetic people. So.
Do you mean vet the contributors?
Well, are you afraid that Scientology is going to infiltrate it? And
They'll figure out how to work with that, I'm sure.
Yeah. I think it's good to expect that, but just
Of
still
course.
keep going with it, and like sort of not care as much as possible.
That's kind of where we are with
Yeah.
that. We don't really care so much if they try and monkey.
but you can also delete them.
Totally, and we will.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It sounds like you're referring more to like a closed Facebook group as opposed to like a public website, where you're trying to control the membership of the
Yeah.
Facebook group.
So our Facebook groups are secret.
Yeah.
And they are controlled, and we double vet, so,
Yeah.
so we have that under control. This is just totally public, and it's intended to be public, so that all the stuff that we're willing to share can be out there for you folks. The conversations we have privately are awful and wonderful, and they'll decide what they want to share and not share, and that'll be public. And I don't think we'll worry too much about being heckled or infiltrated on a public website. I think we'll see.
So as the speakers are speaking, I'm taking some notes because I want to come back to some really kind of powerful and, as you would say, sort of painful and beautiful, right? The positive and the negative, but both important. The points that you're making, that you're each making, that I'm hearing through the sort of psychological lens, and I want to make sure to highlight after they speak, and then of course we'll open it up. But I also did see 2 more hands raised. So these questions are for Christy, I'm assuming, or what she just said. So there and there. So we'll start there.
Thanks. As a counselor, how would you suggest someone help Scientology survivors specifically? Is there a specific avenue that should be followed up as a counselor to help those people?
Oh, so this question is for me. To be able to help people who are leaving or who are second gen,
Survivors who
Just-
have left, yeah.
okay. Well, I think part of what you're talking about is piercing the isolation. Knowing that you are not alone, and also knowing that it's safe to talk about your experiences, which I think is part of kind of the goal, but sometimes even sort of the inadvertent goal of when you hold a forum and offer people an opportunity to write in, and they're not punished for it, and they're not put down for it, and there isn't a consequence, and they're not called on the carpet, and it's all okay, because it's their feeling and it's their experience. It's one of the most healing moments, I think, to know that your feelings actually matter. And your negative feelings especially matter, because coming out of a cultic system, you weren't given that impression typically. And also being offered exactly what Christy was saying, that people don't get, that kids don't get, being offered the compassion and the empathy. It's incredibly important, and also gives you this feeling that you matter. So it's the same thing also with doing that kind of counseling. Tell me about your experience. I want to hear it. I can handle it. Keep it coming. Just get it out, just be able to practice saying it and to see that I'm not going to get mad at you, that nothing bad is going to happen to you, nothing bad is going to happen to me. Because sometimes that's what keeps people quiet. They're told that something bad is going to happen to the person they're telling it to, And I've had a lot of actually former Scientologists who have asked me to check on them after the session to see if they got home safely, because they were sure that something bad was going to happen to them after they left. So a lot of that kind of internalized trauma and knee-jerk reaction to the, oh no, I'm gonna get caught, something bad's gonna happen to me, watching over your shoulder, really needs to be dealt with, really initially. And then connecting them with other former members. I mean, this is why, ICSA is so incredibly important, and panels like this are so incredibly important. Because there can be all these nodding heads, which I'm seeing in the audience. Yes, 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 I get it. Yes, I felt that. Yes, I went through that. And it is something that helps you feel connected to the world. Because when you're raised in this alternate existence, it's hard to know if you have a place in the world, if you can find people you can relate to. And I think also just teaching people in a very practical way about control and about manipulation and about mind control and how it works and how it was used on them, and giving them the science of it and helping them see that this is something that can work on anyone given the right set of circumstances, right or wrong, but the sort of the perfect storm of circumstances. So it doesn't mean there's something wrong with them that they were susceptible to it. Those are the places I would start.
Can I just
Yeah,
add
go
on
ahead.
one
Sure,
thing to
sure,
that?
sure.
A little bit of the therapeutic aspect of the website, hopefully, is through the community. Like I was saying, I think courage is contagious. As we each start to share publicly what some of us never even spoken to anyone else about. Like, I didn't discuss that I was raised in with maybe 3 people in a couple decades. I was ashamed of it. I knew they would judge me. I had fought very hard to find a job with no education and find a place where I could support myself. And I didn't want to undermine that by telling someone I was, raised in a crazy thing. So just allowing these kids to speak up and share publicly should be very, very empowering. It was for me to finally start peeling all these masks off and just own what I am. It was so empowering and so freeing to remove that fear and danger of someone finding out or declaring me or people disconnecting from me, all these things that Scientology enforces. I can't tell you how much lighter I feel after I finally shared my story. As scary as it was to do that, my life changed, honestly. And so that's what we're hoping for, that we're going to create a community that feels like that people start to gain courage from each other and can finally say, this happened to me, now I can talk about it. And so hopefully once they talk about it, they can start moving on. And that's the therapeutic, I think, community effect that we hope to have. And we've had so far in our groups, for sure.
Yeah. And I think also giving a forum to asking the big heady questions and also the very practical questions, like how much should I share in a conversation, right? How much is too much? How much is too little? How long should I be talking for when I talk to anybody? What's my, how do I get through the world? How do I get through my day? And then also, what happened to my head? What did they do to me? So from the very tangible, practical questions to the bigger questions, and giving people an opportunity to share all of them, and they're all normal and expected and all okay. Yes.
I was just going to say, I think it's going to be a game changer for you guys, because it was for our SGA group out of the Children of God when we all started talking about it. I don't know if you guys were homeschooled or what the situation was like for your education, but for us, we were, and so we were all kind of self-taught. So there's a lot of, we had a lot of issues, and we were talking about this earlier, Erin, just going for therapy, right? Like, that's a big issue for a lot of us. And I don't think the therapeutic community is really ready to handle some of the issues we're throwing at them either. But we're kind of self-taught in a lot of ways, and so we learn really well from each other. And so it was a game changer for our group. It really was. To understand that, one, these weren't isolated incidents. These were orchestrated events. We were made to feel this way on purpose. Those were things that they actually wanted to do to us, not we were just bad kids and, they happened to us because we were the issue. So we were finally able to take that bag off of our shoulder and put it down and give back to them and say, no, this is yours. You guys did this to us.
Exactly.
As a group, so I think it's going to be a game changer for you guys. It really is. So good luck. And I was concerned, but you did clarify it's going to be, a public group, but not everybody can post on it, right?
Right,
So,
right.
because
Yes.
that was an issue for us, where we did really have to do some protection and have some protection mechanisms in there, because a lot of our families were still in there, right? And our families can get to us.
Right,
A lot of the group, we're like, I don't give a shit what you say, but our families are the ones that can still hurt us.
Sure.
And so it's very, very, it's a thin line, because we want to be able to communicate with them to help them come and move forward out of it as well. But we also can't put ourselves in that position where we're able to be attacked on that level all the time.
Sure.
Really tears us down. So I wish you guys the best of luck with it. I think
Thank you so much. Those are great points. I'd love to talk to you some more about that after.
Really good point.
Okay.
That when I was talking, when you were asking me the question about therapy, the reason that it's important to learn about what happened to you and the methods of control is you start to be able to understand why you were given those fears, why there was so much fear induction, how that was offered to you somehow for your protection, but really, it was, right, that's the only reason.
To protect the cult.
To protect the
make
cult.
money.
And it is, when you're thinking, okay, why did I just have that knee-jerk reaction? Why did my heart just skip a beat? Why did I just have that nightmare? Why did I just put down the phone when I was going to make a call to get help? Think about what you were told, and not only what you were told, but why you were told it, how it serves the purpose of the group only. It's not for you, it's for them. And so if you don't go to therapy, then you stay in Scientology because you don't think there are any resources out there for you. There's nobody to talk to. There's only your auditor. You have to use sort of in-house services. And so it's to keep sort of the money coming in, and on an emotional level, it's to keep you dependent on being able to get help there because you're convinced that's the only place where it's safe to get help. But again, think about that, right? In a place like Scientology, you're convinced it's the only place that's safe. That's not accurate. So you think about why it is that you were told that, how it serves their purpose. Same thing when you're in an abusive relationship. Why are you told certain things about yourself that are just not accurate about you? How does it serve your controller's purpose? To keep you down, right? Always keep that in mind. Okay, Aaron.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming. So, well, let's see. I've scratched down just some general thoughts that I have about the experience of being a second-gen Scientologist, which I'm glad you clarified that includes third-gen, fourth-gen, because it can be a mouthful.
Yeah.
We're calling it
you-
legacy member.
I like
Legacy,
that.
legacy.
Legacy.
I like that. Sounds good.
You're more likely to be accepted if you're legacy. Anyone who watches Scientology understands that there's different levels of involvement and experience, whether you're public, a staff member, and a Sea Org member. And when you hear different stories that sound different, it's because people have different levels of involvement. But what I wrote down is just some things that I think are actually common to the second-gen experience, regardless of your level of involvement, as far as things you're indoctrinated to believe, that I believe are destructive, that you do take with you, and you eventually have to be like, do I really believe that, or is that just some shit that I have been told my entire life and never questioned? So just a few things here. Yeah, everything that happens to you is on some level your fault. Like literally. Like if you're walking down a hallway and someone slams open a door and it bangs in your face, it's not like they're going to haul you into ethics and be like, what did you do to get hit in the face? Hit in the face by the door. But in an auditing session, it literally would potentially come up. That's something that minor, you'd have to sort of figure out how you sort of caused that to happen to you. That becomes even more destructive if really bad stuff has happened to you, Okay, the idea that if you criticize someone in authority, it is because you have done harmful things to that person, regardless of the validity of what you're saying. That's something to carry with you. The idea that if you get ill or you get sick, it is to some degree because of some bad things you've done, right? Scientology has this concept of a suppressive person and a PTS, potential trouble source. But in order to be predisposed to being suppressed by a person, you have to have done bad things to that person. So even that comes down to, well, you've done bad stuff. That's not a great way to walk around thinking about life. That it's not okay to go to the authorities in any circumstances. It's not okay to involve the WOG or non-Scientologist legal system, that it's all infiltrated by psychiatrists, and even child molesters would not ever be reported to the authorities. Even if they're kicked out of Scientology, they're not reported to the authorities. That's some messed up stuff. That's not good. That Scientology is always the greatest good, that anything done in support or to protect Scientology is always the greatest good. It is always the ends that justifies the means. I mean, when you're just raised thinking that's just the way it is, That's one of those things. That's actually one of the things that makes it really hard for people to leave. That's one of the things they have to unwind before they can allow themselves to leave. And of course, just the concept of disconnection, the whole Scientology story of the nature of existence in the world that eventually trickles down into a frame of mind that makes it very easy to just discard family members because it's not a real relationship. We're all just thetans, we're all just beings. These meat bodies mean nothing. You know, like the familial relationship is a social construct, and Scientologists don't pay much attention to that despite what they say publicly. And, well, that's kind of the majority of my notes here.
Well,
The
if
majority,
those things aren't hard enough, wrap your head around that as a child.
yeah,
Your whole life. Think
Right.
of those things from a child's lens
Yeah.
as you're developing.
and the thing is, I would say the majority, over half, of Scientologists these days are second-gen Scientologists.
Oh, yeah.
Scientology's been shrinking since the early 90s. The membership's not more than 20 to 25,000, 30 at the most. And people aren't joining Scientology. People are not joining Scientology these days. It's true. It's true, and so one of the things I feel, an additional thing that is so valuable about getting second-gen members out there and speaking is because I think that's what makes it more likely for the other second-gens that are in to leave. They see people they know that are their contemporaries, that are speaking in a fair-minded manner, that are just being honest about their experiences, and that's why I think all this exposure is so important. I know that when I was in, I was never able to go online and see someone I knew talking about things I knew were true. You'd always see the sensational stuff that it turns out was true. But it was so hard to believe that it was true that when I saw it, I knew it was a lie, right? So I don't talk about that stuff. I talk about stuff that current members would stumble upon and go, he's telling the truth. Maybe he's not such a bad guy. And also the second generation and the internet age. I mean, Scientology is losing control of its second-gen public members. So many of them are under the radar. It's especially in Clearwater, where I live. These guys are only pretending to stay in because they've got inheritances, they've got jobs, they've got friends and family, and sometimes it's just easier not to rock the boat. But they're not Scientologists. They're not really Scientologists. So if that means it takes 20 or 30 years for the whole thing to unravel, that's a long time. But the unraveling is happening and the unraveling is coming, and it's inevitable. And all we're really doing is speeding the process, and I think that's a noble endeavor. So that's pretty much all I wrote. Yeah.
Yeah, Wendy.
I have a friend who is a Scientologist, and she says that there is a blog or a Facebook group or something. And they are also say that they're ex-Scientologists, but they are very, very angry. They say they don't believe in Scientology, but yet they're still doing the auditing. I don't get there's this.
Well, hold on. There's a few things here. There's a handful of second-gen Facebook groups.
Are you talking about a second-gen group?
Some of them are angrier in their posts than others. None of them are independent Scientologists. There are other Facebook groups for independent Scientologists. None of those guys are in the second-gen groups.
These people say they don't believe in Scientology, but yet they believe in to do the auditing.
You can't have both of those things be true.
Those two things don't go together.
Yeah, you were.
Yeah, 28 years ago, I extracted my son from Scientology, and I swore to destroy the organization. It's taken me a long time. Thank you for helping.
Did you say you swore to destroy the, did you say you swore to destroy the organization?
Well, one of the things I told my son before he left the exit counseling to go back was, I love you, you can always come home, but you gotta understand one thing. For every person you recruit, your mother and I are gonna keep 2 people out. So when Scientologists heard this, they blew him out because he wouldn't disconnect from us. But one thing I did notice in him, and then I saw in other, and he's not second generation, he was recruiting, so it might be a little different. But, and I'm not a therapist, but I do work with ex-men. I've spoken to ex-members for the last 20 years, come to these conferences for 28 years. But, and one thing I did notice that when a lot of Scientologists came out, they blamed the leader for misusing the technology of Hubbard and still believed in the technology. And it took my son almost a year to finally say, you know what, this is bullshit.
So this is an interesting thing because I think almost everyone leaving Scientology travels sort of that sequential path of, I'll use myself as an example. In 2009, when the St. Petersburg Times did their Truth Rundown series of articles about this abuse at the international base, that's when I first started being like, oh no, things are not as I thought they were. And I started paying a lot of attention to David Miscavige, and I got all wrapped up in all these terrible things David Miscavige was doing. And I spoke to one of my friends, Jeff Perlman from San Diego, and I was all electrified that he was also like under the radar, and he's like, oh, LRH is just this con man and a fraud. And I was like, oh, I didn't realize that was a thing. I didn't realize that's where we were going. Oh, like it hadn't even occurred to me. Like that little door hadn't even opened. Oh. Well, that's something to consider.
That's a game changer.
One of the things that I ran into right away, coming out of Scientology and getting onto the message boards and forums, was the concept of onion skin layers. And they peel off one at a time. And so when people, a vast number of people, not everybody, I didn't experience this particularly in terms of the believing that the tech was still pure, I mean maybe for a week or two, but once I went down the internet rabbit hole, things just kind of blew up for me. But a lot of people will come out and they'll be very critical of current management, but they still believe that L. Ron Hubbard knows what he's talking about. Actually, if I'm going to be totally honest, I did go through that a longer process. So the concept of the onion skin layers was a really good one for me, because it's a long process of stripping off one layer, and then another one presents itself that you didn't even know was there. And you take that off, and then there's a whole nother layer, and then so it's a progression. That's a great analogy for it.
Yeah, and almost everyone who's in Scientology these days has never met or known L. Ron Hubbard. All they know is the very stage-managed, edited persona that is presented as L. Ron Hubbard, which I have to tell you, during my entire time in Scientology, was a pretty great guy. I mean, honestly, it's like there's not when you're in, like, everything you're presented and shown about L. Ron Hubbard, and I read his writings, I was like, it makes perfect sense to me.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So what they know of the present time Scientology is very easy to go, well, that's David Miscavige. He's been in charge for 30 years, and to be honest, he's reshaped the organization in his own image. So it's also not false to say that the current Scientology you see is a product of David Miscavige. That's not a false statement. You just have to add on the additional part, and it's all based on the works of L. Ron Hubbard. And L. Ron Hubbard had his own version of a terrible, abusive organization, and in many ways, Miscavige has made it worse, but it's still based on the works of L. Ron Hubbard.
A psychopath who worked on, that a lot of people don't know that he studied like black magic and spells and shit, and that led to psychology and one of the biggest challenges I've seen is that people don't, I didn't mean to hijack.
Yeah.
I'll stop.
No, it's okay. What I would like to be able to do is just take one or two questions now, then move on to be able to really have all of our speakers have a chance to really talk and introduce themselves, and then we'll open it up for further questions. So if your question doesn't get answered now, definitely hold on to it. We will definitely get to it, but I know your hand was raised. Yes.
Yes, I was going to ask Aaron, I've got two questions and a couple of things you said. That you said one thing, that there's a lot of in terms of false, sensational information about Scientology, and this is how I took that you said. But I'm wondering whether the program Going Clear, how accurate that was in your experience.
Yeah.
Because I live in the UK, and the last 2 years it's run reruns regularly, twice a month, and it's really has huge impact. And secondly, I want to ask, what is you saying that the numbers are diminishing? I take it's just in the US. What about, is that worldwide, is it? And so do you know what the figures would be?
We've done back of the envelope calculations, and I'm happy to explain how we've done those. Going Clear is all true. There's nothing, when I said sensationalized, I didn't mean exaggerated. I meant some of the most extreme stories. So I think when people are speaking out about Scientology, there's two things you can accomplish. You can accomplish outrage, or you can accomplish understanding. I think there's a benefit to both. And I think Going Clear, would we agree, was more on the outrage side?
Yeah.
Because you watch that and you're like, what? So what doesn't, even though it gets said, it doesn't really get heard. That those are stories from the international base for the most part, where things were literally worse than anywhere else. And so you go, people, sometimes they'll watch Going Clear and they'll think that's every Scientologist's experience, or that's every Sea Org member's experience, or that's every staff member's experience, and the truth is, it's the experience of many. But, so when I said sensationalized, I meant the media wants the sexiest stories. So the sexiest stories are the ones that get told, and then people think that's what every Scientologist experiences on a day-to-day basis. And that's when I said sometimes there's a lack of an understanding component. There's a lot of outrage, sometimes a lack of understanding.
But also, for the public to see those stories is one thing, but
Yeah.
someone who's questioning to see that, they'll just shut that out because it's
too
not real
unbelievable.
to them. It's
It's
just
too
like,
unbelievable.
Tom Cruise, whatever. I
Yeah.
don't care about, or whatever,
Yeah.
we don't care. That wouldn't help us leave.
That's right. And so I have the Growing Up in Scientology YouTube channel where I interview second-gen members. And we just go through sort of a checklist of questions about the experience of growing up in Scientology. And we just talk about it very fair and openly. We discuss the good times and the bad times. Because in order to create understanding, people go, how can you stay in a cult for 30 years? Okay, so I have to now explain this. And in order to explain why someone can stay in for 30 years, in order to explain that and to create understanding, you kind of have to talk about the positive parts, because if there were no positive parts, nobody would stay in for 30 years. But then if you talk about the positive parts, people want to call you an apologist, and you're like, no, I'm just trying to create understanding. I'm just trying to create understanding. I want people to watch the videos and go, I finally get it. I don't want them to go, I finally get it, now I'm ready to join Scientology. I want them to go, I finally get why this carries on the way that it does. Did I miss a question?
And then there was a question about the numbers as well.
Oh, so this comes from people who worked at International Management and were the Mark Headleys and Mike Rinders of the world. And he said at their peak, there were about 100 to 130,000 active Scientologists. Means in a given week, they went in and did something in an org or mission. Now, and I'm not going to use a calculator here, but I'm just going to throw out some numbers. There's about 175 churches of Scientology in the entire world. Real churches of Scientology, not about 175, 180, depending. Okay. Anyone who spent any time in an org in the last 20 years knows that your average org has, if they're lucky, 30 staff members.
Yeah.
If they're lucky, 100 active Scientologists in the field.
Yeah.
Okay, so crunch that times 175, add an extra 5,000 for some Sea Org members, maybe add another 5,000 for the random missions that exist around the world.
Staff members.
And you're being generous at this point. And you don't come to a number much more than 30,000. Anyone who's been in Scientology in the last 20 years knows those are the numbers.
And that is international.
Yeah.
It's not just US.
Yeah.
Right.
And you have the experience too now of seeing some new buildings that they've built that are beautiful but empty.
Yeah, so we went down to the Church of Scientology here in Philadelphia, where I used to be a staff member, 1315 Ray Street. Went down there last night, and didn't even look as good as it did when I was there 15 years ago. And I pointed out, we took a walk there with a group of people, and I said, this is not just the only Church of Scientology in the city of Philadelphia, which is like the 5th largest city in the United States. This is the only Church of Scientology in all of Pennsylvania, Maryland, Delaware, New Jersey, and you'd be lucky if there's 30 people working here and 100 people taking any Scientology services. Those are the numbers. Scientology's going away. It's just doing it slowly. Because of their money and because of their ads and their promotions and their Super Bowl ads, they just create the impression that they're this, great, wonderful thing. And I've been doing a lot of work trying to help some local politicians understand that this is not an 800-pound gorilla they're fighting with. They can stop being so careful. They can stop being so afraid, and they can start just treating them like what they are, which is just a local bully who insists on getting their way.
I love it. Okay, so Rod, and then we'll move on to Chris.
I was wondering if you, Aaron, or any of the others could speak to how child Dianetics or Harvard Hubbard's writings on children as babies as small bodies shaped your childhood.
Do you want to take it? You don't have to.
No, I think we can all answer that one. For me, it started super early as my mom got in and became indoctrinated. So right as I was learning language, I started having to learn about taking responsibility, exchange, overts and withholds. But that concept that I'm only your mother this lifetime, and next lifetime, you know, you might be my mother or whatever. Removing that parent-child bond really and the value of that, and then teaching you that you're 100% responsible for everything that happens to you, that you're an ageless spirit, Phaeton, in a small body coming around for another time, because we keep repeating lifetime after lifetime. So being made to feel responsible for everything that happens to you, and supposedly just regaining your abilities and your memory from your past lives. You're not really given resources besides Scientology. You're not given tools, and the tools that you should have are taken away from you because those things have stigma attached, or you know, your parent that you're supposed to bond with at age, you know, this age, or feel that your needs are being met, or that you're safe, that you have your own identity. All those things are just being chopped off right when you know, at the knees, as you should be receiving them. It's very heavy to feel responsible for every aspect of your life when you're 3 years old, and feel that you have to, you know, you have to make your own meals, you have to get yourself dressed, you have to pick yourself. You're a big Phaeton. And it just gets worse and worse the bigger you get. You know, you're the one cleaning the house, you're doing the laundry, you're taking yourself to school, you're heading off predators, you're trying to avoid being molested. I mean, all those things. And the older you get, the more responsibility you get. And it just never stops. It just builds and builds and builds and builds and builds. And you think it's right and you're wrong. So if you don't like it, you have overts. You're being critical, you're resisting, you need to get your ethics in. So it's just it's an awful thing, honestly.
Just say a very brief thing on that. As a public director of training for the Flag Service Organization, if a child could be sold a course, and in that course where we did everything that the student had to the St. Louis Special Briefing course, as a supervisor, I was expected to get a 6 and a 7-year-old through the Dianetics course, right? Reading Dianetics, Modern Science, and Mental Health, and going to cramming because they misbehaved and I wasn't handling their misunderstoods. If this course could be sold to the 7-year-old, I was held responsible using Hubbard's technology and going to cramming if the kid misbehaved because he was 7, you know, and this was all, says here in child Dianetics, it's just, you just have to tap into that, and of course you couldn't object because you'd never get out of cramming, or you'd go be scrubbing sauna somewhere like I did at times, you know, but it's another level of the sheer insanity of that idea, and that's the way Hubbard operated.
The other aspect of it also this opens doors to is if you have no age, and age is only a consideration, all sorts of things can happen to you. Of course, labor, you know, of course you're not getting an education, you're not exposed to the outside world, but also sexual things. So, you know, huge disparity in age of relationships, and that's normal. And if you don't like it, you have a consideration on that thing, which means you have issues. So as a child, if someone approaches you and wants to be romantic or is flirting with you, if you reject that, you have an issue. If your parent rejects it, they have an issue. That creates an incredibly unsafe environment for children in that. And I watched it, I experienced it, it's rampant. And it's not just Sea Org, it's not kids that signed billion-year contracts, although that happens to them too. It's in the Scientology schools, it's at home. It's once you accept that, you know, you 6-year-old, you're not really a 6-year-old, I can be attracted to you. That's not wrong. If you resist, it's wrong for you. It's really scary, the doors that opens, so just on that point.
Absolutely.
This is one of those interesting areas of contradiction of what Hubbard wrote, because you have this concept of an ageless, genderless being, and that translates into, well, it's adult in a small body is a particular choice of words, but it's ageless being in an aged body, right? But you also have the concept of a genderless being. And so if you want to use the fact of an ageless being to justify treating children as adults, well, if it's a genderless being, then what's the problem with homosexuality? And yes, Scientology has a problem with homosexuality. And you're like, well, it's an ageless, genderless being, but somehow that the gender of your meat body matters, but the age of your meat body doesn't. Like, who's picking and choosing the rules here?
Hubbard.
Right.
Exactly.
And that's one of those principles where Hubbard laid it out in a particular place, in a particular way, and it gets used by different Scientologists in different ways. If you are inclined to be attracted to children, you're going to seize on Hubbard's words on this subject as a justification for your behavior. One of the things I've tried to be as clear on, at least from my perspective, is that it's not necessarily true that Scientologists take what Hubbard said and go, oh boy, now I'm attracted to kids. Like, to be attracted to kids, you have to be attracted to kids. If someone says you're an adult in a small body, you don't all of a sudden become attracted to prepubescent children. But if that's who you are to begin with, you're going to use Hubbard's words to justify that. And, although I can't say that I've known Scientologists who have said that literally pedophilia is okay, I can think of many examples where there's nothing wrong with a 35-year-old man trying to pursue and marry a 15-year-old girl in the Sea Org. That's not normal. I'm very aware of instances where ethics officers, let's say you have 2 Sea Org members, and let's say you've got a 35-year-old guy and you've got a 15-year-old girl, and the parent of the girl is not a Sea Org member. And she's objecting to this. She's like, this is wrong. I don't care who he is. I don't care if you're all Sea Org members. And the ethics officer will put that person in and be like, well, let's examine why it is you're objecting to this. I think you're holding on to some WOG fixed ideas, and your daughter is a Sea Org member. She's not a 15-year-old girl. She's a Sea Org member. So this is how a datum gets used in abusive ways by abusive people. And there's not a lot of safeguards against that kind of stuff in Scientology. It definitely happens more so than not.
And I think also looking at this, again, going back to a psychological perspective, if you think of a cult leader as a narcissist, which I'd say about 95% of them are, some run them for other reasons, and we can talk about that another time, but when you go into the narcissistic person's head and their ego needs, they can never be wrong. And so they need for the other people in their lives, their partners, their followers, to always double back, sort of look at themselves. What did they do? What did they do to cause it? So that's why there's all this confusion when you grow up in a cult about cause and effect. You really don't know if it's because of something that you did or someone else did, and you're not quite sure then how to interpret a particular situation to know if you caused it or not. You just have to assume that you did cause it in some way because, again, thinking about why you were taught that, how did that serve the purpose of the leader? The intention, the focus, the blame was never going to be on him. So it's the same thing also when you deal with sort of being faced with all these contradictions. If you have a logical mind, you're going to notice the contradictions. But a narcissist, when you bring those contradictions to their attention, they will then say, there's something wrong with you for bringing it up. There's something wrong with you for doubting it. And so again, doubling back on you, always on you, always on you. And so when you're faced with the contradictions and you notice that something is off, you're right. Something is wrong with this. It doesn't make sense. But the leader makes sure that that doesn't matter because you have to question your intentions. You have to question sort of what's wrong with you. This is across the board in almost every cult, not just in Scientology. So I want to sort of generalize the message to people here also who are from other organizations where this feels very familiar. Okay, so Chris, take it away.
Hi. So I was a card-carrying member of Scientology for 27 years. I started doing courses and that sort of thing when I was 15, still in high school. But I was raised with it. My parents got involved when I was about 4. And they were, the whole time that I was growing up, my parents actually got divorced when I was 2. And my uncle got my dad in, and my dad's brother. And they did the communications class. And my mom and my dad were still in tight communication because joint custody of me. So when my dad got my mom in, she did a communications class, and then they did some marriage counseling, even though they were divorced, and they actually ended up getting back together. So my view of Scientology as a child, from what I was told by my parents, who were active members, and then they started working, this is out in California, they started working for the church as staff members at a mission in Pasadena, which is kind of the lowest level organization there is there. It's not anything like the Sea Org. And the 70s was a very different time for Scientology. It had a different feel to it. And if you weren't in the Sea Org, it was a kinder or gentler Scientology, at least as far as the public levels go and that sort of thing. It was very spiritual and very groovy baby, and that kind of thing. So my experience growing up with Scientology was Scientology light in many ways. And I was told by my parents that the reason we were even a family was because of Scientology. So it was so I had a lot of very positive thoughts about Scientology growing up. And one of the things about second gens that that makes the experience so powerful is you never have anything else to compare it to. There isn't some other thing, there's no other model for your life. So Scientology was just sort of always there. And I don't know that it's really so different than growing up in a Christian household or, this sort of thing, where this is just how it is. There isn't, there was never any questioning of what was going on or the ideas or concepts of Scientology. This was not something I questioned. Why would I? The two biggest authority figures in my life were absolutely sold on this. And so of course I was. And the only time I ran into issues growing up, and I went to public school, I wasn't going to, my parents couldn't afford Scientology school. So I learned to read at a Scientology school when I was about 5, but that one year, that was all they had, right? Then I had to go to public school. So running into criticism from other kids, teasing, baiting, badgering, that sort of thing, and especially when I hit high school, I learned to just kind of keep it to myself and not really talk about it a whole lot. And once I started doing classes, once I went down and my dad said, well, why don't you just go check it out for yourself? I was like, oh, okay. And I went and did so. And I'll talk more about that in my thing this afternoon after lunch here. But I just realized that, in listening to you guys talking and thinking about this whole second generation experience, that all these terrible things that go on with children, we never questioned any of that. Like, we didn't look at those things as these terrible, horrible, at least I didn't contextualize it that way. And I had some bad things happen to me when I was a kid. I didn't have, I wasn't molested or something, but I certainly had some bad experiences because of Scientology. I can look back on it and go, yeah, that was L. Ron Hubbard's influence in my life. And I guess the only point I don't know exactly precisely what point I'm making, except the all-consuming aspect of it, I think is a bit different for a second gen than, say, a first generation person who comes in and they think they've now found this relief and this wonderful truth. Well, for us, there was never any other truth. So it really, coming out of an experience like that, I think is the difficult part, because you have to recontextualize all this stuff from a whole different level, and it makes it difficult to, even to this day, in some ways, to not rationalize some of that behavior, or to not think about it from the way that I thought about it when I was a kid or a teenager or a young adult, because it was my world. And that's powerful. That's very, very powerful, and it makes it harder to step out of it. It makes it harder to figure out what's normal. So that's, I guess, what I wanted to say here.
So what you said about having the two biggest authority figures in your life already totally sold on this thing.
Yeah.
This is going to sound really crazy. Oh, God, it's so embarrassing to say. That's what David Miscavige and Tom Cruise were for me. The stage-managed presence of David Miscavige is a pretty kick-ass guy
Mm-hmm.
who's a great public speaker. I mean, not anymore because he reads that gibberish. But, you know, his publicly stage-managed persona is pretty powerful and impressive. And, you know, Tom Cruise these days acts like a maniac. But back in the day, he didn't. He was just the world's biggest movie star and total badass.
Right.
And so honestly, I would look and be like, oh, look, these two guys are evidence that Scientology is a great thing. I mean, it sounds so stupid, you guys. But it's like when you know, I remember when I was little and I first found out Tom Cruise was a Scientologist, I remember thinking, oh yes, that's gonna, I can fall back on that mentally to rationalize, see, Scientology makes you like Tom Cruise.
That's right.
It sounds so dumb, you guys.
I'll tell you, that is absolutely right, because, and it kept me in for a lot longer than it should have,
Yeah.
because I was sold on David Miscavige being the hardest working Scientologist on the planet, and the most dedicated, and it was a little rough as a Sea Org member when he stood on a stage and said, Tom Cruise is the most dedicated Scientologist. We all just looked at each other and went, seriously? Because we were 24/7.
But I was there and I was like, yes!
Yeah, I was not. I did not appreciate that remark. But David Miscavige represented that to me. And he's this current leader, and he's been around, you know, since the 70s and all this. And I saw him, I interacted with him a couple times. And I just thought he was the baddest badass of all badasses that have ever existed, you know, and he just hardly ever slept, was working his ass off, was taking more responsibility for this planet than anybody in history. I mean, I really, really was sold. I bought the entire bill of goods.
And then when Chris and I were both in the Sea Org together in Los Angeles is when Tom Cruise got his Freedom Medal of Valor, and Tom Cruise gets on stage and says, I have met all of the world's leaders. I have met the leaders of leaders, and none of them approach David Miscavige. I was like, sold!
Yeah.
You know?
That's right.
Yeah.
I was totally in that headspace. Absolutely,
How old
right?
were
I
you?
believed when Tom Cruise
No,
said
by
it.
that time I was an adult. I mean,
Okay.
I actually got into the SO when I was 21 or 22. So yeah, no, I was an adult. I had no great excuse at that time.
Yeah, you were reporting
Yeah.
based in Scientology.
Yeah, I know, I'm just saying.
Yeah, so anyway, I guess I just want to say that, you know, that it was a struggle to come out because that had been so consuming and such a worldview for me. And even to almost to the very end, I couldn't question in my own mind, when faced with a number of facts and obvious truths that anybody objectively would just go, this stuff's crazy. I would go, it was opposite world for me. You know, no, David Miscavige has produced this and this and this and this, and therefore I heard, you know, in the late 2000s, well, he's beating his staff. And I was like, they're lying, no way. There's absolutely no way that is true. And then, even after seeing church internal literature that convinced me, no, he probably was. I still was rationalizing it with, this guy's such a badass and is so responsible for the world and is doing such amazing things, I'm gonna give him a pass.
They must have deserved it.
Yeah.
Oh man, what they must have done to deserve that.
They're distorting it.
He's
you know?
spoiling in
You know,
ethics, right?
Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
Yeah.
That's right.
At its finest.
Wait, you
So
know,
exactly right.
we're all
Yeah.
laughing about this, and that's very funny, but that was, talking about 25,000 people
Yeah.
at best. You don't see the similarity with the current administration, which is including 300 million people?
Yeah, but I stay away from any politics these days.
Yeah.
It's so toxic.
But I wanted to
Well, that's the
say,
problem.
well, right.
Well,
but
no, that's not the
it's
problem.
okay. But I wanted to say a couple things, and then we'll open it up for questions. We have just under 15 minutes left. Sometimes what you deal with within a cult where there are celebrities is you have the cult of celebrity within a cult.
Mhm.
And so when you are looking at these people who are famous, who you're going to be enamored with, who you're going to listen to because you think that what they're saying is valid because they were in a movie you like, and also the stage is set, like just think about it in a multi-sensory way. The music, right? The lights, the sort of inlaid gold or gold spray paint, whatever was used. You get the sense that something is happening here that doesn't happen anywhere else. And it's special, and it's amazing, and it's transcendent. And then you think the message is the same. The message fits what your senses are taking in. And you want to be a part of that. But that's not day-to-day life, of course, in a cult. But you also have this sense of this sort of point of reference, like, oh, if this is somebody who I'm looking up to, someone who seems to know their stuff and they're telling me something, that's going to inform the way I think about it. I think about it even just, it don't have to be in a cultic group to have this happen to you. I don't like turbulence on an airplane. It's not my favorite thing. But I know that when there's a lot of turbulence, I will look to see how the flight attendants are reacting. And if they seem calm, and they're smiling and they're still serving whatever, I feel calmer, right? That's my frame of reference. That's my point of reference. So you do that within a cultic system, you do that within life. But also, Chris, you brought up an interesting point about rationalizing the way you were treated. I hear a lot of people say, well, yeah, my father used to hit me when I was young, but I deserved it, or I needed it, or I wouldn't be the man I am today if he didn't do that. How do you know that? But you have to, for some people, believe that. Because it can't be that my dad just hit me for no reason, because what does that mean about my dad, and what does that mean about me? So you find a way, and it's just natural to do that, to say this had to somehow have been for my benefit, it had to have made sense, and it had to have been benevolent in some way. Otherwise, you can feel very differently about the people around you who are supposed to be protecting you. So cults, I think, they sort of do a lot of the programming, but we, just in terms of our human nature and psychology, do a lot of the reprogramming for ourselves. And they rely on that. Okay, questions? Let's see, someone who hasn't asked one. Yes, go ahead. Yes, in the blue shirt. Sorry, I don't know your name. Oh, no, the man in the blue shirt? Turquoise? Turquoise? Teal. I'm so sorry, it's teal.
Of course, teal, yes.
You're a young guy like.
He normally only answers to the handsome guy.
Right.
So sorry, didn't mean to insult.
So, something that Christy said about growing up with emotion, I've encountered, I'm a therapist and dealing with a second generation Scientologist, and she told me about some process called bull baiting. And while I was listening to her tell me about that, I remained very professional, and yet, inside I was running around in circles going, holy shit, I can't believe what I'm hearing. And so I'm just kind of wondering about this whole growing up without emotion and how you begin to break out of that. And I don't know if any of you have been to therapy, but if there's any advice for therapists in helping you find your way back to being a feeling person, or if that's even considered to be a desirable thing.
One of the things that makes this hard to intelligently discuss is because, speaking for myself, all I have is my own experience, and there's a stigma in Scientology about therapy, and there's this thing of people struggle with emotions. What I'm trying to say is I don't know how to compare my experience to the normal experience. I don't necessarily know how my experience deviates from the norm, so it's hard to talk about it honestly. I will say it's the bull baiting and TRs, training routines, the communication drills that are done in Scientology is one of those things that put in a certain context, and if it was sold at a Tony Robbins seminar, sounds like a great idea. Because the idea of doing communication drills where let's just say they're not being done for hundreds of hours and they're not being done with touching. You could say that there's some value to being able to confront things in life and be confronted by things in life without being thrown off or distracted. And anyone can see how that could be a valuable thing. But when you do that for hundreds and thousands of hours, and when you also, and this is also even more to the point, there's this idea that is taught, it's fundamental to Scientology, that negative emotions are the result of engrams in your reactive mind. You don't find out until much later that they're really the result of invisible things stuck to your body. But but earlier on, lower on the bridge in Scientology, any negative emotion, referred to as misemotion, and then you have the contradiction of this as well, but are the result of engrams, painful experiences of pain and unconsciousness recorded in your subconscious mind. And so, as a Scientologist, someone doesn't have to tell you necessarily that you're bad for exhibiting an emotion. You just have to read it. You'd be like, if I feel this way, I'm dramatizing my reactive mind, and so you self-censor. You don't want to be the guy who's going around fear, blame, shame.
Right.
You don't want to be, depression is unheard of. Oh my God. I mean, if Scientologists don't seem depressed, it's because anyone around them would be like, what? Hey, knock that off. You're dramatizing. If you're acting all depressed and somber and whatnot. So, dramatizing. Reacting out the content of your previous painful incidents without being aware that you're doing so. So I switched the subject a little bit. You talked about bull baiting. I'm talking about the reactive mind now.
I'm talking generally about.
Right. And so, but that's where I start to answer the question and I go, yeah, but how do I know how my experience really differs from the norm? People have trouble with emotions. I don't really know.
The thing, and I've actually spent quite a bit of time thinking about this and looking at this, and there's a suppression of your emotions that occurs. It is self-policing, because it would be embarrassing to be in a group of Scientologists and be dramatized.
But dial it back to being 2 or 3, and you're having a little tantrum because your mom's leaving, and what does she say to you? Stop being banky.
Don't be
Exactly.
banky. Don't be
That's
banky.
right, and that's
So you're
indoctrinated very early.
It's called being banky. You have, LRH says you have a reactive mind, and the reactive mind that causes you to behave a certain way, be dramatic, manifest things, be misemotional, they call that your bank. It records bad things. It restimulates you. It makes you behave a certain way and be reactive. So that your reactive mind versus your analytical mind that makes positive choices and behaves analytically. So parents say, stop being banky. That means stop misbehaving, stop being misemotional. So it's thought stopping and control in those little Scientology parent lingo.
And then this brings up another hilarious point of contradiction just within Scientology itself. If you believe what Hubbard says, you cannot get someone to stop dramatizing their reactive mind by telling them to stop dramatizing their reactive mind. It's subconscious. So to have this parental habit of like basically saying, stop being banky, it's like,
Right.
if you believe Scientology, that's not gonna work.
It's the Scientology equivalent of, if you want something to cry about, I'll give you something to cry about.
I'll give you enough present time threat that your bank will go away.
Right. Exactly.
And I did make a joke about it. It is not a light matter to indoctrinate kids this way, okay?
It's horrible.
Right.
But if we don't laugh about it, we just cry.
Right, exactly. Okay, so
You know.
we have time for one or maybe 2 more questions. Anyone who hasn't had an opportunity yet to speak okay, yes.
You spoke about how they manipulate the cult of celebrity. Is the hope that if I believe in Scientology, I'm going to be like them?
They're role models in a way, yeah. Especially Tom Cruise, who really puts himself out there that way. John Travolta as well, I think, in some ways. So they have that responsibility put on them. I mean, they are a public face of Scientology, and that is to Scientologists as well.
It's used a couple different ways. I mean, Tom actually gets up there and doesn't say, you can be a celebrity like me. He says, I, as the world's biggest celebrity, instead of running around enjoying my life the way a WOG celebrity would, I'm out there working hard to spread the word of Dianetics and Scientology and bring people in. So if someone like me can work this hard at it, someone like you damn well better be working a lot harder. That's really how Tom's status in the church gets used, to almost shame other people into working even harder. Not really, I want to be like Tom, but maybe I'm more secure in being a Scientologist because Tom's out there saying he's a Scientologist. He's making it easier for me to bring people in, so I better be doing it.
Just think
Remember
about the
head
guilt
hits the pillow
induction.
thing?
Yes.
The what?
Remember that?
When your head hits the pillow, you have to.
What Tom Cruise in this video, right, where he gets the Freedom Medal of Valor, tells all Scientologists, when my head hits the pillow at night, I have to ask myself, did I do everything I could today to forward Scientology and make this world a better place? And that got run on us as Sea Org members, right? And we're 24/7.
Yeah.
And it was like, head hits the pillow. That actually became an expression in the place where we were working.
Right. Okay, thank you. And one other question maybe from the side. Did you want, I know you already spoke.
I just want to make a quick point about this sleep. On the ship, Hubbard's sleep was a ritual. Yes, he only slept 3 hours a night, but you could never really tell when he was sleeping because he was either in session or busy. They had a red light that went on. So nobody knew, but most senior executives we're like, well, if I'm getting more than 3 hours of sleep a night, what am I complaining about, right? And that became the expected norm. If you were powerful enough and things like that, you wouldn't need any more than that.
Totally.
And
Yeah.
so Hubbard was never got more than 3 hours sleep.
Right, right.
I
Yes.
just want to say something to you guys. You know, we've come a long way since the 1980s, when Bullet Hooper was first bankrupt by Scientology for talking about it.
Right.
John Atek was bankrupt for talking about it. Time Magazine won't even mention it anymore because they were sued for it.
Right.
And now, we Remedy can do it almost with immunity, and you guys, I hope, will do it the same way. And, you know.
Yeah. I want to thank all of our speakers. I want to thank Christy and Aaron and Chris for what they presented today, but all the very important work that they're doing to help others. I mean, they really are reaching out and reaching in and caring, and that also means being able to kind of hold on to the burden of other people's pain. And it's a hard job at times to do that, but it also it makes the world a better place that there are people willing to do that. And I think you're right. There were many years when I could speak about cults, right? I had a whole speakers bureau, and I couldn't say Scientology is a cult.
I was not allowed. They weren't.
Really?
I was not allowed.
Wow.
No, yeah, we would be,
Right?
you guys were, thank
So
you so
to
much.
have the freedom, right? I mean, I think that there is something really wonderful about it, and a lot of people have paved the way to get there, and you're continuing to pave the way further for future generations. And we all wish you the best of luck, and in any way that we can help support the work you're doing, just let us know.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.